So, hello and welcome back to the Journey Beyond Yourself Summit. Boy, do we have a treat today. We have Dr. Rollin McCraty, Director of Research at the HeartMath Research Center at the HeartMath Institute. Welcome, Rollin.
Well, thanks, Sally. It's great to be here.
Wonderful to have you here. I will just introduce you and then we'll get stuck in. So, Rollin, I know that you have a degree in psychophysiology, and your research interests include the physiology of emotion, the heart-brain communication, and the global interconnectivity between people and the Earth's energetic systems. So findings from your research have been applied to lots of tools and technology to help us optimize our own individual health and also to the wider organizational health, performance, and quality of life. So super important, super pertinent to us, your work. You've acted as principal investigator on numerous studies examining the effects of emotions on heart-brain interactions and on autonomic, cardiovascular, hormonal, and immune system function, and outcome studies to determine the benefits of positive emotion-focused interventions and heart rhythm coherence feedback, which we'll get into. You've been featured in numerous documentaries and films, and you are an author as well. So I am absolutely delighted to have you here with us, and thank you so much for your time.
Well, I can't think of a better way to spend it than helping people understand the deeper aspects of the heart and how we can use the heart to really evolve our consciousness.
Right. And you are a wonderful man because you have dedicated your life, as far as I see it, really to activating the heart of humanity. I've heard you use that term before, and the HeartMath Institute looks at both at the individual level and what we can do to really get into our hearts and live from this deep, beautiful, intelligent, intuitive space, but also within the global community to get us all living from the space of the heart. And there's all this science behind it. So where do we start? I think I'm going to go here. So psychophysiology. You are a specialist in psychophysiology and the heart-brain connection. And you guys, where did you start? Back in the early 90s, 91, 92?
91.
91.
Well, we actually started long before that, but we officially formed a nonprofit called the HeartMath Institute in 1990. And then,
right. So even before that, so you guys were one of the first to produce studies on looking at the physiology of emotions, really. There might have been a few positive...
Well, I wouldn't say we're the first to look at physiology of emotions. A lot of people have done work on emotional physiology for a long time in a lot of different ways. I think we were the first to really bring the heart into the picture front and center and to show that actually one of the pivotal early findings way back in the early 90s was that it's actually the rhythms of the heart that is most reflective of emotional state.
Right.
More so than brain waves and a bunch of other type of measures that have been traditionally done. So in fact, fast forward a bunch of years and we now know that you can actually determine what somebody's feeling, whether they're cognitively or aware of what they're actually feeling. That's a big problem today as we're so disassociated. But a person's emotional state is about 75% accuracy in detecting, or not detecting, but determining a person's actual emotional state just on looking at the rhythm of the heart. And that's unheard of.
It's huge.
It's huge. I mean, people spent their entire careers trying to do that from brain waves and all these other measures, with some success, but nothing like what we approached in this simple single measure. And that's what made that such a kind of a revolutionary finding in many ways. That's become kind of well known now, at least in our circles.
Yes, exactly. So tell us more about that, because the heart rate being reflective of our internal emotional states. We're talking specifically about heart rate variability. And many people know about heart rate and they think a low heart rate's good. Push your heart rate high. That can be good too for that stretch and that endurance building. We're talking about heart rate variability. So let's define that and let's get into what that is.
All right. One of my favorite topics. No, it's proved to be a very useful measure. And in fact, we started doing research around what's now called heart rate variability before it was even called that. In fact, one of my mentors is the guy, Don Singer, who's now passed on, but coined the term HRV. He gets the credit for that. So he hung out here quite a bit. So we all, as you said, Sally, we all know what heart rate is. You know, how many times did the heart beat in a minute? So that's why it's called BPM, or beats per minute. But in reality, our heart rate is changing all the time. It's changing with each, in fact, it's each and every heartbeat. So the way to think of that, and this can be confusing for people. I've been around it so long, I don't quite understand why it's so confusing. But just, if you imagine, you know, your little heartbeats going on, right? So the time interval between each consecutive pair of heartbeats is always different. It's varying, beat to beat, always varying. And that's what's heart rate variability. Now that's a lot harder to measure because you have to accurately measure each peak of the beat and measure the time between them rather than just counting how many times did it beat in a minute, right? So it becomes a little more challenging to accurately measure that. But as it turns out, heart rate variability is immensely important for a lot of reasons. First of all, the amount of it we have, it's a natural thing, this natural variability. And in fact, let me say this, if we didn't have this beat to beat variability, there would be no such thing as a heart rhythm.
Yeah. Wow.
Right? Because it's you know, kind of an old metaphor that's completely wrong. You know, like they used to teach in fact, I had a music teacher argue with me recently that still likes to teach that the heart is the metronome.
Wow.
You know, I'm saying, no, sorry. In fact, we have one of our papers is actually titled "The Heart Is Not a Metronome." Anyway, she liked that metaphor, but we have more of this natural variability when we're young.
Yeah.
Right. And as we age, we have less of it.
Yeah.
So that's, in fact, it's one of the very best measures of aging.
Yeah.
Is how much variability do we have? It's a somewhat linear relationship between the amount, I'm talking about how much now, and age.
Yes.
Now, if medically speaking, or in clinical work in medicine, that's become a hugely important thing to measure, because if we have lower variability than we should have for our age, that is a really important indicator that something's amiss.
Yeah.
Not just in the heart, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second, but in fact, it's a very strong predictor of future serious health problems.
Yes.
So in fact, you can see heart rate variability kind of take a dive, if you will, you know, or go lower than it should be for your age. In some cases, years before the onset of symptoms, in things like diabetes and cancer and a whole host of every major disease probably now has been correlated with lower heart rate variability than we should have. So that's one aspect. I don't want to spend too much time there.
Yeah. And that's huge. I have a quick question, which I'm sure you know the answer to. Do they use this now in clinical settings? Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's thousands of papers in the clinical side of things.
So this is huge. And I still think it's not as widespread knowledge as it should be. That heart rate variability, age dependent, age appropriate, is one of the best markers of potential health concerns. A year, 2 years later, which is huge.
Yeah. So the how much is a measure of we can use different terms that all kind of interrelate, mean similar things, like resilience. It's a measure of health status, functional status, because it's really reflecting not just the heart. I mean, it's heart rate variability, but for variability to occur, the brain has to be working right. The heart and the intrinsic cardiac nervous system, or the brain and the heart, and all the nerves in between, all have to be functioning properly. So any part of that system that has an issue, it's going to show up in heart rate variability.
Yes.
So with that said, I don't want to spend too much time there, just give some context, because there's an even deeper level of heart rate variability. That's really what your original question was about. And that's why emotions are reflected in the heart rhythm or how, right? So now if we forget a minute for about how much of it we have, there's actually a deeper thing reflected in the heart rate, or the heart rhythm. I'm going to use that because it's the beat to beat changes that creates the rhythm. And if you look at the rhythms, most people have heard that we have heart rhythms. So the rhythm, we're just sitting here now like we are, our heart rhythm is actually going up and down in a rhythmic fashion. So Now, if we look at the pattern that's reflected of the rhythm, this is where it reflects our emotions, which is independent of how much. So in other words, you can be an old fart, kind of like I'm getting to be, and have a lower level of it relative to my son, who's in his 30s, who's got a lot more range of it, but we would still have similar patterns, say if we're frustrated or impatient. And now what happens in the rhythm, the pattern of the heart rhythm, when we're feeling things like frustration or anxiety or impatience, those are, kind of common ones we experience, is the rhythm becomes very chaotic looking. Now, what that's literally reflecting is that the activity in our brain and nervous system is desynchronized. We are literally out of sync.
Yeah.
Right. Otherwise, well, not otherwise, but as opposed to that, when we're actually feeling things like gratitude, appreciation, you walk out the door in the morning. So I'm sure, if one of those days, God, what a beautiful day it is, right? You just have that, that sort of natural feeling. You're not sitting, I'm going to appreciate, but you're just feeling it.
Yeah.
Your rhythm shifts into a completely different mode.
Yes.
And that's what we call a coherent rhythm.
I was just going to say, you coined this term coherence, and even that coining of the term coherence took a little bit of time to decide how to define that, right? So how did
let me clarify. We didn't make up the term coherence. That's been around for a long time before I came along. Yeah. But we did use we did define it in the context of physiology in this respect of a coherent or incoherent rhythm. So it's really amazing. We don't have time to go into all the deep internal science of this, but to have these coherent rhythms literally means a lot of things in our body have to be working together in a more harmonious and synchronized way that really underlies our ability to do our best, whether that's in performance of sports or dance or arts, because everything's in sync, but also to think clearly, to make good decisions. And then a whole other line of studies showed that that's how we're, when we're in that coherent state, that's what really underlies or enables our capacity to access intuition,
right?
Different types of intuition. So there's a lot of, in fact, there's over 400 independent studies now that have shown that when we teach people how to get coherent, that it has 400 studies. So I can't name all the benefits here, but lowered blood pressure, better hormonal balance, better scores on taking tests, better shots in archery or shooting. On and on it goes. Lowered anxiety, depression, lowered blood pressure, better recovery from diabetes and heart disease. And you kind of get the idea here. So it's a really good thing to learn how to shift in and increase the ratios of being in this more coherent or synchronized state.
Yes. And as our mutual friend, Dr. Joe, says, when your heart's working coherently, your brain is working coherently, and vice versa. And when your brain is working coherently, you are working coherently. You are working well. You are working in order. You're in order. You're not in chaos. Exactly. So you've spent a lot of time now, and I know you have like an engineering background, and you spent a lot of time developing tools to help us to get into this synchronized, coherent, orderly, healthy state. Do you want to tell us just a little bit how they work, what they do, and then perhaps you could do as a little demonstration so we know what it feels like to...
Okay, sure. Well, there's about, I would say, we have a lot of tools and techniques, but about 8 core ones that each have, they sound, when you first hear them, they sound very similar. And in some ways they are, but once you understand it and go a little deeper, you go, oh yeah, I get it now, how they're distinctly different. Like freeze frame is one that that really helps us access our intuition and our larger self, which is a great thing to be able to. That's really what I think this work is all about, is really learning how to access our deeper heart's intuition.
Well, let's talk about that. If we've gone there, I'd love to go there. So let's talk a little bit about the science of the intuition of the heart, because it's not an airy-fairy thing now. This is the center of us, and it connects us to the greater. And this summit is all about expanding past our limits. So this is very relevant here. And you're a scientist, so give us the background on the science.
I will, but I don't know why I'm just being drawn to share this. We just did a big 3-day long global coherence event. We do once a year. We did it online last week. Actually, it was over. But one of my favorite things, I mean, it was very in depth and lots of sharings with the participants and all that. But one of the favorite things that out of all these talks and sharings and things, we had Greg Braden was a speaker and Claudia Wells and some other folks who were all part of it. But we had, on one of the mornings we started, well, we asked you to practice some techniques since yesterday's thing, and we'll just share about that. And this one lady who was new to this work popped on and said, you could just hear it in her voice. She was so excited. And she said, this is really real. The heart really does talk to you.
Wonderful.
She had discovered this, but you could really hear the breakthrough that she had made and the excitement in this, of really understanding that that the heart really was for her, that she had first discovered the voice of her deeper intuition. So beautiful. I just had to share that because it was, you had to hear the excitement and the voice of, wow, of that discovery.
That's what it's all about. And she's just had that she's discovered freedom. She's gone out of her limits that she was currently in. Beautiful.
Yeah. So now scientifically, how do we, so I need to back up and just learned the hard way that if I don't start here, it ends up with more questions and takes more time.
Yes.
So our experience in research results suggests is, first of all, there are really 3 types of intuition, 3 kind of general classifications or categories. So the first I call implicit knowledge or implicit learning, right? And this is the type of intuition that almost all the books, there's at least 50 books I read back when we started doing this work, are about. And it's the type of research that's done in academia around intuition because it's safe.
Yeah.
This is about the brain accessing memories that are unconscious, that are stored away, that where we learned something and either didn't know we learned it, we were just watching something and that brain is, absorbing that, or we actually forgot we learned it, more formally. Anyway, it's stored away in the unconscious parts of our brain, the memories. It's what's called implicit memories, right? And so we come into a problem that we have, and so it's also called dual process theory. I don't want to get too technical here, but a very fast channel where the brain is pattern matching to all those past memories and going, this seems relevant to this situation I have in the now.
Yes. Right.
So, and most of the research these days is arguing about how the pattern matching process works. But the basic theory is pretty solid. So this is also related to what's called expert learning sometimes.
Yes.
So there's many examples, but a classic one is a nurse who's been around for a while, been on the job for a few years, can walk into a patient's room and go, uh-oh, this person's going to code within the next hour or so.
Yes.
And she's usually right.
Yes.
And you ask her, well, how do you know that? She goes, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. And a newer nurse, that maybe she's mentoring or something, is looking around like, how do you know that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is an example of that. It can be called expert knowledge.
Yes.
But it's based on this process.
Yeah.
Now, one of the problems with this type of intuition is it can be wrong. All right. Oftentimes, because it's based on past knowledge or past examples that may not always, even though there's a pattern similarity, may not really be relevant to the current thing.
Yes.
Or situation. I mean, I don't want to spend too much time here, but all right, second type of intuition we call energetic sensitivity. Now, this is our brain, nervous system, especially nervous systems, capacity to detect real signals from the environment, other people, for example, that we detect and then decode and have, like we would call an intuition.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of examples here as well. Have you ever felt, Sally, like somebody was staring at you?
Yeah.
You turn around and they usually are.
Yes.
right? There's actually been a couple of studies that show that's a real thing, right?
Yeah, Rupert Sheldrake's big in this circle. I met him.
Yeah, Marin
years
Slith has
ago.
done some
Yeah.
studies on that and as well. But so many other examples, like there really are people who can feel earthquakes coming. So we now know we can measure changes in the Earth's magnetic fields prior to earthquakes.
And we know animals do the same. So
well, right. So that just, yeah. So this, you get the drift though. These are real measurable changes. Empathy is another example.
Yeah.
Because there really are, as you probably know, because you're a HeartMath trainer, signals that we communicate magnetically between people that we're detecting and decoding. So those are just some few examples of, we could go on each one of these here, and then the third type we call non-local intuition. This is the kind we really want to talk about here, I think. Yeah. So these are the types of intuitions you can't write off or explain away from the other two types. But it's important to understand all three are real, and we use all three.
Yes.
And so the non-local, these are the types of intuitions that have to do with across time and space, for example, or when we're talking to our deeper heart would be in this category.
Yeah.
Again, we could spend an hour just examples, but common ones. You start thinking about somebody's name comes up to your consciousness. In fact, this just happened to me yesterday. Somebody I hadn't thought of in years. For some reason, the name popped up.
Yeah. And
I got an email from him.
Yes, of course.
Like a couple hours later, right? So you know what I mean? Those examples, or like another classic example. I don't know. You a mother, Sally?
Yes.
All right. So do your kids sort of think you have eyes in the back of your head?
Because yeah, they absolutely believe still that I can read their mind. It's brilliant, Rollin.
Yeah, but even they can be on the other side of the town, right?
Yeah.
So somehow we're tuned in to our kids, right? Mothers especially, but fathers too, to a certain degree. So that's kind of a non-local example because they could be a long ways away, right? Or we can have intuitions about the future. Another classic example that a lot of people have experienced is driving. You're cruising down a road that maybe it's, you take every day to work or somewhere. Been down it thousands of times. But for some reason, you slowed down before you went over a hill or around a curve or something that you don't normally do.
Yeah.
And there was the child running out in the street or ice or an accident.
Yes.
Something that if you hadn't done that,
yes,
you would have probably been in trouble there.
Yeah.
So
and we all have these examples in our lives when we think about them. If everyone thinks about, we've all had them, and you usually end up going, I don't know why I did that, but it was so fortunate that I did, or I don't know why I went that way, or I don't know, I just had to go there and then I found X. So we've all had these experiences.
So let me take it one. I'm going to get into the science that we did to kind of prove this in a second here, but another example, take us one more to what I'm really talking about. I'll ask you personally, and for your listeners on their behalf here. Maybe even recently, this is pretty common. You asked to do something, or your kind of mind was saying, that you wanted to do something. Maybe it was ambition, or you just wanted something. And you were on the track to go that way, but you had this deeper inner prompting or feeling that that's probably not the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then didn't follow it.
Yes.
So I don't want to put you on the spot, but you know what I'm talking about, I'm sure.
Oh gosh, it happens to me a lot. Yeah. And largely because of your training. Yeah.
Well, or we might have said something that was really not very nice to someone, and had that inner prompting, I really need to call them or go see them and really clean that up. And we don't do it. We don't follow through on that intuition. So this is really more the heart intuition kind of I'm talking about now.
Yeah.
So what I'm really suggesting here is that the biggest source of stress on the planet across all societies is exactly what we're talking about now. It's that lack of alignment between our who we really are at our deeper ourself, which the heart accesses, and the mind.
Yeah.
And our ambition training, and
yes, because we've always have the calling, and if we ignore it, that's when it leads to regrets, or frustrations or a sense of out of alignment.
Yeah. So anyway, that gives some context to the three types, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. That's brilliant. So let's have a little bit of the science, as you were saying, about the non-local.
Yeah. So some of the original experiments that, and we did these because we heard from so many people that were starting to practice the HeartMath tools and techniques, which you're quite capable of teaching to people now. You're a certified trainer. That their intuition was noticeably, kind of radically in some cases, like on steroids, that they had seen this big shift. In that inner prompter and their intuitions, and that they were following them, and that the second thing they typically will still do say is synchronicities have noticeably increased.
Yes.
And I think that's an easy explanation because we're following our inner guidance that kind of knows, where we should be and what. Then the synchronicities started emerging. So we pretty in depth. I won't go into all the rigor here because this is all published for people that want the scientific nitty gritty. Go read the papers. Yeah. But a lot of care, a lot of thought goes into these protocols and these setups so that you can't explain it away through other ways. But basically, the first round of experiments, there was a protocol where people are sitting at a computer, kind of like we are now, right? They're looking at a computer screen. But meanwhile, we've got electrodes all over their head, measuring their brain waves and ECG and skin conductance and some other measures. And so they push a button, see a blank screen while recording all the data, right? Then an image shows up on the computer screen. Now, these images were selected from the two opposite ends of what's called the International Affective Picture Set. So in other words, their photographs have been well researched to elicit different types of emotions and different strengths of emotions. Right. So the two ends means on the one end, we've got bunny rabbits and nature scenes and, things like that. On the other end, the other extreme end are things like a bad guy with a knife at a woman's throat, or snakes striking at the screen. You actually, when that comes up, you actually have a, visceral reaction to these. About as edgy as you can get and feel okay about showing them to people. Yeah. So two extreme ends. So basically what we did is look at the data before you see the pictures. And we do this a bunch of times, right? Yes. And this is done in a way that the photo that's going to come up is randomly selected in a very rigorous random way after the data has been collected. Yes. So no one can, the computer doesn't even know what the future picture is going to be, let alone the experimenter or the participant or anybody like that. So when we look at the data before you see the picture, what we found, I'm going to cut through here because it was a very in-depth study. What predicted about 80% accuracy, what the future picture was going to be, was the heart. Yeah. The activity of the heart. Now in that, so you saw the heart rhythms shift and diverge in a way that would predict. But then we were also able to measure that the heart was sending through the nervous system a measurably different neural signal to the brain. All before you see the picture, unconscious at this point. Then you see brain activity change after the heart set the message up. Then you see a body response. So the gut feeling or the hair on the back of the neck. Yeah. So the gut gets the credit. Yeah. Oftentimes because that's or the hair on the arms of the neck. So that's where we consciously feel it because of that now afferent feedback into the brain, as long as we're paying attention to the body. But the real flow of information was heart, brain, body, then conscious perception. Yeah. Does that make sense? Absolutely. And it's phenomenal. And I'm going to dig out this study and put the link to it on this page, Rollin, because it's phenomenal. And I know there's lots and lots of studies like this. So what you're saying is before we saw the picture and before the picture had been shown, the heart knew, then it communicated with the brain. Then it communicated with the gut, and then we could, if we're in tune with our body. But the whole body. I mean, but gut and body, it's just where we get to. Yeah. The gut is an effector, or what's called an effector organ. It gets affected by the activity in the system, and doesn't have as many ascending pathways back to the brain, as like the heart does. Yes. Anyway, so we go heart first, brain, then body. But often we're told, gut instinct. It was a gut instinct, if you listen to your gut, but what you're saying, that completely flips
the knowledge.
Yeah, well, it's also just as many sayings. If you think about our language, put your heart into it. Ask your heart; it always knows.
Listen to your
play
heart.
from your heart.
Yeah, yeah. But we take these as non. You know, we don't listen to them as we should. We don't take them as the truth, which they are.
Well, yeah, right. So there's so many things in our language that emerge because of a deeper intuitive understanding.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Or this understanding years and years and years and years and years ago, you know, that we've lost. Yeah. So there are so many studies like this that prove that the heart knows first. So this intuitive knowing of the heart. So should we go? Yeah, you go.
I was just going to say let's wrap this up. The way I got this is back in the 90s, right? The original. We went on and developed other protocols, you know, that it's been confirmed many times over now. But the way I originally got that published was to say that it appears that the heart has access to a field of information outside the boundaries of time and space.
Yes.
Right. So that was my code back then. I've become more out of the closet since then. Yeah. And that was perfectly acceptable language for peer-reviewed scientific journals back then.
Wow.
Because, you know, at that point, things had been like non-locality and, you know, it had been proven, you know, in quantum physics. But at that time, it was only supposed to happen at subatomic scales.
Yes.
Now, even in the quantum physics community, they've blown way past that and shown that these same processes happen at macroscopic scales. And here we were showing the same thing, you know, in wet, big, messy organs from a, right? So, but what if you think about it, Sally, that was my code for what is a field. Well, what is a field of information outside the boundaries of time and space?
Yeah. And you put the word appear in back in the 90s, but you'd probably drop that now. So let's go there. Let's talk about the electromagnetic field.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to go there. So, but basically that was kind of code for, in every culture, I'm sure your ribbon, God, I can't talk today. God, forget it. My brain is not working well today. Anyway, a lot of the native cultures have words for this, as well as almost all cultures.
Yes.
But we just here at HeartMath call it your larger self, higher self, soul, spirit would be terms that are used a lot. But we just try to take any religious connotations out of it, because we really do mean this literally. That there is the physical heart and then what we call the energetic heart. And I'm just suggesting that's a very real thing. It's just at the energetic level that you can't yet put under a microscope.
Yeah.
Just like you can't put a thought under a microscope or an emotion. We can look at physiological loose correlations.
Yeah.
But
and nobody would deny that the thoughts or emotions exist.
Exactly. Or intuitions. Yeah.
So this power, this intelligence of the heart that leads us to this intuition, to our higher selves, is a field that is. Should we talk about?
Sure. Yeah. Well, the field now is secondary to that. Really, the big game here is learning how to get coherent, which increases the coupling.
Yes.
To that larger self.
Yes.
That's where the intelligence is. And the heart is the transducer from that energetic domain down into the mind, brain, DNA, all of the cells.
Yes.
Not said there, we could spend a lot of time there, but to move on where you're trying to get me to go.
I was, because you're just so interesting that everything you mentioned I want to go into more, but let's stay with where we said we were going to go before, which was, as a result of that, which you've just said, you've developed up all these tools. And so we have within us the capacity to regulate our heart into this coherent place, which is a good, into the coherent state. So should we do a demonstration of what a coherent state feels like?
Yeah, but I'm happy to do that, but why don't we go down the track you just started trying to get me to go down, and I kept going back. Is that okay? And then we'll do that, because I think it's a neat next step.
Yeah.
Because we've really been talking about inner coherence in a way now.
Yeah.
When they're coherent, the immune system and the hormonal system will all sync up and become more efficient. But when we put electrodes across the body, to measure your heartbeat, the electrocardiogram, it's called the electrocardiogram for a reason.
Yeah.
We're measuring electricity.
Yeah.
right? Or we stick electrodes on the head to measure brain waves, you know, the EEG. What is literally being measured is the flow of electrical current that's across the electrodes. That's what's being measured. Now, whenever, this is basic physics 101, whenever you have a flow of current, you produce a magnetic field. And magnetic fields and electric fields are quite different. They're not the same thing. But one of the properties of magnetic fields is they easily go through things. That's why we can pick up our cell phones here and have a conversation inside. My previous career before it was, actually, I used to be an engineer for Motorola, communication engineer.
Yeah.
Something I know a little bit about. But so we use a magnetic. It's a good analogy here because, you know, I'll often ask, you know, a crowd, well, how does my voice or my text message get from here to the cell tower?
Yeah.
Yeah. And most are going to say magic. I hear that a lot. No, but in reality, we're using an electromagnetic field to carry that information. This is a great analogy from where I'm going next here. But so if you don't believe that magnetic fields go through things, stop using your cell phone indoors. Right? I mean, you can even be in an elevator or a closet and make a cell phone call.
Yeah.
Magnetic fields go through things,
yeah.
right? Unless we have shielding that would shield that, but of a particular kind. But so the same thing happens in us. When the heart beats and we measure the electrocardiogram, we radiate a magnetic field out into the environment. Now, how do I know this? We can measure it.
Yes.
Right? So you use a different device called a magnetometer, and you can measure the magnetic field of the heart feet away from the body. And you can measure a brain wave about an inch away with the same device, magnetometers. Now, the field goes farther than we can measure. That's the sensitivity of the measuring equipment, of course.
Yeah. Yes.
So we know that the heart's radiating this magnetic field you can think of as your personal field environment, right? But this is some of our early work as well, back to the 90s again, using the similar kind of techniques I would have used back in my Motorola days to decode or demodulate the information being carried by a radio transmitter, right? Use those same techniques and apply them to the magnetic field of the heart. And guess what? You can easily pull out the information riding on the field. That directly ties back to the heart's rhythmic patterns and our emotional state, right? So what I'm saying here, Sally, is what we feel inside doesn't just stay in the skin.
Yeah.
It is literally radiated into our field environment.
Yeah.
And so the next step then was, okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
So what? You know, is there a so what? If we put somebody next to somebody, you know, a few feet away, is there a measurable effect of the fields coming from one person on the other? Is our nervous system detecting those and responding in a measurable, meaningful way? You already know the answer, I'm sure, because of course it's yes. This again, all published stuff. So in reality,
one of the ways that I learned this through one of the experiments was your son and your dog.
Ah, yes. Yeah.
Do you want to tell that? Because I like that. Everybody likes that.
Yeah. Sure. Anyway, let me just finish that thought. That's okay. That there's always this energetic communication that's going on between people or in groups of people. That's largely below our conscious awareness, right? And all the sayings again in our language. The tension was so thick in the room you could cut it with a knife, or you know. And I know in the younger people, I'm hearing now all the time that it's kind of a language from back in the 60s is coming back about vibes.
Yeah.
You know, I'm vibing with them, or boy, those were some bad vibes. That's reemerging, that the younger kids have a pretty clear understanding of this, of the reality of this. So animals you asked about is a great example. And kind of this is going way back in history. We had, this is actually a kind of a muck around study in a way that we did on a weekend. Had my son come when he was like 12 years old back. He's in his mid 30s now, but that's how long that was done ago. And brought his dog over. And we wired up the dog and with recorders and Josh and I won't go through all the details here, but basically we found that the dogs easily responded to Josh's emotional state. And when Josh got coherent, his dog also shifted into a coherent state.
Yes.
So all through energetics. He wasn't petting or talking to the dog or anything. So it became a great kind of example. Yeah. And we still use it in our training programs.
Yeah.
Because I can be really on, and I can lay out all the scientific connectors and blah, blah, just really give a great lecture. What do people remember the next day? The Josh and Mabel story, the dog, and
they're both good. That just triggers our memory of the great lectures that you had.
Yeah. So anyway, we've done the same thing with horses, and many other people have followed up now and confirmed this.
But I also think it's relevant because many people are understanding this and nodding away, and they get that we can pick up the vibes from other people, and you've entered a room and you know that you've just entered at a moment, you should perhaps turn around and leave. Many people are with us, and many people can identify and associate more with the animals. We talk to them and they'd say, I just know that my horse or my dog knows how I feel. When I'm sad, it comes and sits on my knee. So I think it's relevant to reach.
Yeah. They definitely do. Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Sally. I've had in the last, say, year and a half, probably 2 handfuls of veterinarians contact me. I got interested in the human-animal energetic research that have all said in their own way the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, some deeper than others, but the one consistent thing is that especially with dogs, when an owner brings a dog in that has a certain type of disorder, I know instantly I have to treat the owner.
Yes. 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 Yeah.
It's interesting because of the dog's picking up on and the stress that's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can see it, can't you? Anyway, we're getting sidetracked.
It's so easy to do. But
it is. So back to is it a good place to expand our conversation even into what you're doing with HeartMath more globally? Is it a good place to go?
Yeah. So we spent 30 years working on the personal level, tools, techniques for us to really improve our own health, well-being, performance, getting our own physiology and coherence. Now we're more focused on what we call social coherence and global coherence. So the same principles apply, right? You have all the systems within a body that have to be synchronized and working well to be healthy and perform well. Well, the same thing's true in groups, whether that's a family, a corporate leadership team, a sports team. The relations amongst the members of that group or team have to be in harmonious alignment to really function at a new higher level. And in so many families and teams, there are separations that occur energetically and sometimes consciously, oftentimes. It's, even my own family can remember, some, looking back on it, rather trivial thing happens. And there's so much drama around it, and brothers don't speak to brothers or sisters or parents for years. You know what I mean? It's silly, right? When you get to a new level of consciousness and kind of rise above that stuff, it seems silly that all that energy and separation that goes on. But anyway, so that's a lot of our work now is how do we really bring people to get rid of these separations, which really means rising above, which involves a shift in consciousness. It's the only way this can really happen, to get past our biases, right? And our judgments and, our in-group, mentalities that, and so on, which is so needed in the world right now. The most important thing is that we, I think, learn how to get along with each other.
Absolutely.
Let people be, So one of the things we talk a lot about in these training programs is that, there's way more than this, but it's compassionate latitude, right? So having compassionate latitude for maybe your coworker or somebody in your family, because the thing that they just did that pissed us off, right, or upset us, is probably the same thing we did last week to somebody else.
Yeah.
Right, or will do next week. So let's just bring in some latitude here.
Yeah.
With each other and learn to communicate from a more coherent space.
Yeah.
And when we add coherence to communication, it's amazing. Well, you've gone through some of the programs, but
it is amazing. It is amazing, and it's amazing to feel it within a group as well. You can go in the room and feel the vibe, and equally you can feel a change in a room when you've all locked in to your heart together, and you're creating a greater whole. And it is, isn't it? It's about stepping beyond and going beyond. This is where I finish this physical thing, because already, as you've said, we know that's not true, because we actually expand way out. And then if you take what you said already, the link of this and our greater self, we expand limitlessly, really. Then you add up that into the world of today, and we're all, largely because of stress hormones and emotions and all the rest of it, just going more and more separate and more individual and more looking after ourselves. And then if I say something and you say something different, I'm more inclined to go, but I said this, and so I'm right and you're wrong, and that's it. There's the division. Whereas if I drop back into my heart and start to change up my emotions, which I know is going to change up my state of being, my actual heart state, I go into a more coherent state where my heart's coherent, my brain's coherent. I can literally feel you more. I can also encourage you into a different state, can't I? Because we connected within that field.
Yeah, you create your field environment can literally measurably lift people into a higher state if we're able to maintain our own coherence. In your example, I don't know why this seems important to say, because we see this in so many group dynamics that we work with, that I think it's an unconscious thing in a lot of people, is that to really hear somebody, to genuinely hear their perspective, means we have to agree with them. I mean, it's so not true, right? I mean, but our brains somehow block actual deeper heart listening. This is not about agreeing.
Yeah.
But once we really hear where they're coming from and why they might have that feeling or perspective based on their history, and their culture and worldview, then at least a lot of times, a lot of the separations melt away. And we can go, I get why you would feel that way. I mean, I don't agree, but hey, we can, let's have a cup of coffee together. I mean, you know what I mean? Rather than
rather than that we're seeing, aren't we, in the world? So it's so important. And I've got my eye on the time, and I'm going to respect your time, but I would love you to just tell us briefly, because you've got amazing, information from these global study sites that you're looking at.
Yeah, well, that takes us into the global coherence work, which is, I know we didn't have much time to go into, but basically we're also looking not only at the magnetic interaction between people and animals, but between people and the earth itself. And we could spend a whole hour on that, and just amazing. Well, we could do that sometime, but just amazing findings coming out of this work. We published a lot on this in the last couple of years, kind of a bonanza of publications. Yeah. We're finding that basically, just make things kind of a quick summary here, that if we look at the magnetic field lines of Earth, geomagnetic field, these are actual field lines. You can, like when you dump iron filings on a glass plate, right? And you put the magnet under it and it shows you the shape of the field. Those iron filings line up in little lines, showing that actually visually represents what I'm talking about, these magnetic field lines. So that's north, south pole, Earth, same way. But these field lines can literally act like guitar strings, and you can pluck them and they vibrate. And it's the solar wind coming by that's plucking the strings, because Earth is turning and so is the sun. But the wild thing, Sally, is that, and this has been known for a long time, nobody just put the pieces together.
Yeah.
Before we kind of came along and got into this, is that one of the primary resonant frequencies of the field lines vibrating of Earth is exactly the same frequency as the coherent heart rhythm. When we're in coherence, which we naturally go into when we're feeling good, when we're feeling appreciation, kindness, love, compassionate latitude, we're going into this natural coherent state, which is healthy for us, but we're also resonating. We're now synchronizing with the rhythms of the Earth itself, right? So just like we can transfer energy and information between people, we've proven that we're suggesting here is that same thing is going on at a global scale.
Yeah.
Right. Now we could go a lot more into this, so that it's a kind of a giant biofeedback system between humanity and the Earth itself.
Yeah.
That's really what's going on. Just taking a whole day lecture into 30 seconds here, but
No, well, it's good to, it's like leaving us on a cliffhanger, but it's fascinating and encouraging us to go dig deeper too. But it is, I mean, we know this intuitively, don't we? But it's just so exciting to me that you are doing the research to prove it to the naysayers or the people that, you know, we believe science now. So it's not about naysayers, but it's just fantastic that we're able now, and we have the tools now to get really in and look at the science behind all of that.
Yeah. Just to me, this is really all about elevating consciousness.
Yes.
And the fast track to that, in fact, I'm going to go on a limb here and say the only way to really do that is there's a certain eye of the needle we have to go through. And that actually is literally the heart, the energetic heart. And that's what connects us with our larger self. And that's that flow of energy information that allows us to finally bring the mind and emotions into management from our larger perspective. So that we're able to rise above the mind level of consciousness.
Yes. I think that's a beautiful place to leave. But what I'd like you to do is to take us into.
I know you would. So I wanted to, all right, let's do it. I wanted to cover some of that because the technique I want to share is one that's out of our social coherence program that not a lot of people would have probably heard because, and it's called Shift and Lift. And it starts, as many of our techniques do, with the first step is called heart focused breathing. And I know you're familiar with it, so let's do it. So heart focused breathing is you focus your attention in the area of the heart. Imagine your breath is flowing in and out of your heart or chest area, breathing a little slower and deeper than usual. But find a comfortable rhythm that's easy and comfortable for you. Now, just all do that. Now, I'm just going to talk a little bit here. So that focus of attention in the area of the heart is important if we're wanting to shift the rhythm of the heart. And some people find they can put their hand to help keep their focus there when they're first learning, but you don't have to. And now, this is a technique. I'm going to go to the second step in a minute here, but I just want to add that this is a technique that you can practice, that you can do with your eyes open. And this is a technique meant to be done right when you're in the middle of a conversation with somebody or on the phone or in a meeting. Okay, so step 2, activate feelings of kindness, appreciation, genuine connection, or an attitude of deep listening. So you just kind of want to breathe as you're doing the heart-focused breathing. Start breathing those feelings of kindness, appreciation, an attitude of genuine listening. Step 3, now we want to radiate those heart qualities to raise your vibration and help lift the energy field environment that surrounds you. We can kind of consciously radiate those feelings into the environment. Now, with some practice, this is really, and Sally, it's great that you have your eyes closed, and that's a good way to learn this, but this is something you can really practice with some practice. But when you're in a meeting, you know, or at the dinner table, doesn't matter, and things start going sideways, you know, there's some drama starts happening or some non-listening or people grandstanding, just start using the technique to help lift that field environment. It's not always going to make everything work, but at least you're maintaining your balance. But it's surprising how often it really can shift the dynamics, especially if a couple people get onto it and are doing it in a meeting or any kind of event. So that's why it's important to learn that we really can bring this level of coherence into the real world, into very real world environments and situations. Otherwise, you know, what good is it?
Yeah.
Where the rubber meets the road, right? Because that's really what the HeartMath, we focus so much on in the moment, you know, right? Being able to maintain our composure and really kind of come from the heart in the stressful or the challenging moments. Now that's when we need it most. And when things tend to go sideways the most, that if we could have brought that in, can completely change the outplay in the future play out.
Absolutely. This is where, because we're all getting good at having our self-care practices, whether it's meditation or taking a walk or whatever, but in the heat of the moment, when you're with another person or a meeting, you need these in-moment practices. And I can say from experience that practicing this technique and others like it, which I know you've got more of, is the difference with leaving a room, if it's a meeting or an interaction with somebody or a phone call with a family member, I'll leave it there. The difference of that ending with that feeling of annoyance and frustration and regret, and if you're in and perhaps a non-conclusion, so you've got to have another blooming meeting about it. You know, it's the difference between that and wrapping things up in a way that you feel good about.
Yeah. Indeed. Indeed.
So I encourage everyone, it's simple, but it works. So use these tools, and anyone that's interested in how do I start to measure my own heart coherence and heart rate variability and work with that? There's techniques on, there's tools, applications, you know, cool bits of tech on the HeartMath website, and I'll link it all here.
HeartMath.org, if you don't mind.
Pardon?
So there's heartmath.org and .com. Appreciate you coming to the .org side, because that helps support the research. And
.org.
there are devices that actually, I think you're talking about, Sally, that allow you to see your own heart rhythms and how coherent or not coherent they are in real time. So as you practice these techniques, it's a way of literally retraining your nervous system into that as the new normal or new familiar. So it's a lot easier to do it when you're in a really challenging situation.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the other thing I think that's worth pointing out, is that all of these, you know, you took us through a process. Like any skill, the idea is that we learn a process step by step, so that we can access it. As you're talking about the 3 levels of intuition, it becomes an implicit level of intuition. And when we need it, we just automatically flick over. Like, imagine a world where everyone's doing that. When there's some confrontation that comes up, when I feel my emotions, you know, rising and making me contract instead of expanding and going into those lower frequency emotions, or if I could automatically do a little shift, a little tool, a little breath, a little using my awareness and my intention to change, so that the whole interaction changes. This is what I wish for my children. You know, if their world was one where they did that naturally, we would change the world. We would up level the consciousness of the world, wouldn't we?
Indeed. And that's what the Global Coherence Project is all about.
Yeah.
Is bringing thousands of people together to really be conscious of what we're feeding the field.
Yes.
And what the science is clearly starting to show us is what we feed the field, whether our personal field environment or the larger earth environment, matters and has measurable changes on others and in the real world.
Yes. Yeah. So if you can't do it for yourself, do it for your kids. If you can't do it for your kids, do it for other people. If you can't do it for them, do it for the planet.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and I know you have lots of these experiments going on that anybody can join. So you can be a part of these
absolutely
groundbreaking experiments. So we'll put all of that information here too. Rollin, I really appreciate you. I love you dearly. I'm very grateful for all you do in the world. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking time to share with us your knowledge.
It was my pleasure. Thank you. And I wish you and all of the listeners for your summit a great day and most success in life.
Thank you so much, Rollin. You take care.
All right, will do.
Speak soon.